Hi, welcome everyone. We already have our speaker Laura here with us and our my co-host Ben here. Our presenter Laura Warner is a professor in University of Florida, Department of Agriculture, Education and Communication, and the Center for Land Use Efficiency. She is a quantitative social scientist. Dr. Warner is specialized in understanding behavioral influence on adoption of best practices among key target audience, and translating behavioral theory into practical actions. She focuses on water conservation, pollinator production, and technology adoption in residential landscape, public space, and nursery and greenhouse operations. So I think her presentation will be a very perfect or very good fit for us folks here in Utah. And so I think we will get to learn a lot. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And good afternoon, everyone. I'm joining you from Gainesville, Florida. It is 81 degrees here and it looks stormy, but we have not seen a drop of rain in quite some time. So it's dry and hoping that we get some soon. Anyway, so I'm joining you today to talk about human behavior and how that relates to water conservation. It's an area that is really, really fascinating to me. Just to give you a little bit of background for how I got to focusing on what I focus on, um, I describe myself as a natural scientist or horticulturist turned social scientist. I've been in extension and outreach all of my career, but I started as a horticultural educator teaching people about how to save water in landscape contexts. And I became really, really interested in the fact that just providing good information didn't always lead to behavior change. So while I have degrees in horticulture, I actually went back to get my doctorate in social sciences so I could understand why people do what they do. And I think human behavior is absolutely fascinating. So now I'm at the University of Florida in the Agricultural Education and Communication Department, as well as the Center for Land Use Efficiency, which is a statewide interdisciplinary center. And I'll tell you about a couple projects that I've worked on. I've been studying human behavior change in urban landscape contexts now for 13, 14 years and have learned a lot about people. So when I was thinking about joining you today, I just kind of was thinking about some differences between Utah and Florida, and there's definitely some differences and definitely some similarities. So I think the number I found is, depending where you're at, you all get something like 13 inches of annual precipitation. We get about 4 times that with 50 to 60 inches of rain a year, but most of that is during a rainy season. And you pair that with really sandy soil, and we're not actually as abundant in water here in Florida as many people seem to think. So I know you all face droughts and long-term water scarcity. We face flooding, we face saltwater intrusion, and despite this relative abundance, we face overuse and water scarcity here as well. Landscape-wise, I think we really have kind of a different sort of norm in our residential yards, where here in Florida, lush landscaping and irrigated turf grass is culturally ingrained. Most of the state, you are required to get your check off to move into your property on new construction. You have to have an in-ground automated irrigation system, whether you want to use it or not. So it's just a very pervasive throughout the state. And in some places, 50 to 70% of a household's water use is applied outside the home, and the majority of that is for landscape irrigation. So we water a lot. A lot of it is potable water. And then we both have urban growth. Florida has very high population density and also tourism, which stresses water systems. So kind of thinking about this, I think we can say that water availability is very different between our two states. But we both face conservation challenges and rely on voluntary reductions. We need people to be involved to reach conservation goals. And in both places, I think something that we really have in common is that cultural expectations and urban growth shape water use patterns. So kind of interesting to sort of come into this and just think about the role that people play in saving water. So here's the big problem that I focus on. So, and I work with a lot of interdisciplinary teams, but essentially, there's a lot of really great conservation technologies and best practices and policies that are available, that are being developed regularly by researchers in both of our states. And that's wonderful. That's progress. But if people will not use these technologies or follow the policies or engage in the best practices, the actual impact is limited. So we're not going to see the water conservation that we could. So that's where the human dimensions come in, and really need to understand why people do what they do, why they don't do what they do, so we can really realize the impact that these conservation strategies can have. Now, where the work I do comes in is we don't know in a lot of cases what people think about these technologies, best practices, and policies. So we really need to understand those perceptions so we can address barriers to adoption, barriers to engagement, or the reasons that people will or won't engage. Okay, so I have been running a statewide water panel every year since 2013, and a lot of the information that I use in my extension programming and research program comes from the statewide panel. And to date, I've collected data from over 30,000 households and look at different types of behaviors. I'm going to talk to you about two key behaviors today that I've researched, but also bring in psychology, look at the psychological determinants of those behaviors and perceptions. And I use different types of analyses to understand how people think about these behaviors, and then how we can predict their engagement in those behaviors. So I am going to discuss these two different behaviors today. And the first one I want to chat about a little bit is irrigation restriction compliance. Now, I understand that in Utah, there are places with irrigation restrictions, but it is not quite as common as it is in Florida. So we pretty much have irrigation restrictions in place year-round in 4 of our 5 water management districts. So if you see the map of Florida there, the northwest part of the state, the Panhandle, we have restrictions only in a few of the cities. The rest of our state is under irrigation restrictions year-round. If we have to generalize, most places you are allowed to irrigate 2 days per week before 10 a.m. and usually after 4 p.m. to stay out of the middle of the day times. But there are places that there are exceptions. But that's kind of a generalization. But basically the entire state, other than the Panhandle, you can water 2 days per week. So as I mentioned already, in-ground irrigation is very standard and very extensive in residential landscapes throughout Florida. And of course, people really need to choose to comply with these irrigation restrictions for them to have the impact that research has shown that they can have. So this is where, again, people come in, and there are some pretty important implications for conservation. So I work a lot with collaborators around the state, and some of my key collaborators are like conservation professionals that work for the water management districts. And I try to to have them help me drive my research program and identify what's going on around the state, what are the human related water conservation problems that we can work on. So this series of research was really driven by discussions with my collaborators in the water management district saying, like, we're really having an issue with compliance. So that's kind of how this this piece of my research program got started. So one of the models that I like to use to explain human behavior tells us that engaging in a behavior like complying with irrigation restrictions isn't black and white. It's going to be a multi-step process. And this one tells us that if we're talking about irrigation restriction compliance, somebody has to have knowledge about these policies before they can even make a decision about complying. And so that's the first step. And it's only after they have that adequate knowledge that that they're going to form an opinion. And it could be really positive or it could be really negative or somewhere in between. But then it's only after that, in a third phase, where they're going to make a decision that, yes, I'm going to take action and I'm going to comply with these irrigation restrictions, or no, I'm not. I'm not going to do this. And so you have to make a positive decision in that third step to go on and actually implement the behavior. And so I think maybe you can see there's a lot of places where things could go wrong, where maybe somebody's not going to get to that decision to comply with irrigation restrictions. So over the course of a couple of years, we've collected data at these first two stages, the knowledge and persuasion stages, and asking basic questions like, do residents have adequate knowledge in that first stage to move on to the persuasion stage where they can form an opinion? And then do residents have opinions that are positive enough that support compliance, that support that decision to follow these irrigation restrictions? And just kind of what you see sometimes when you look around in the neighborhoods is you'll see in-ground irrigation running every day. You'll see it running in the rain. There's just a huge opportunity for compliance. The house I'm in now, when I bought it, the irrigation timer was set to run 7 days a week, and I turned it off the day I moved in, and it hasn't been on ever since, but people water a lot here. So huge opportunity. Okay, so over the course of 3 years, which was 2022, 23, and 24, through my statewide water panel, we asked folks if there were irrigation restrictions that applied to them. And an important point to make here is that the information that I'm going to share is folks that are not exempt from irrigation restrictions. So that the numbers I'm sharing with you, everybody should be saying, yes, there are irrigation restrictions that apply to me. So like this data removes individuals that live in the panhandle, removes people that are exempt for other reasons, such as water source, that type of thing. So everybody should be saying yes. And across the course of 3 years, we only had about 50 to 55% of Floridians who were indicating they were aware of these irrigation restrictions. So that's, I don't know, I guess we found it kind of surprising at first, but that really is kind of telling that that awareness is so low for a policy that folks should be aware of. So one year we did ask the people who indicated they were aware, we asked, so are these voluntary or mandatory? And only about 60% indicated they were mandatory. So I think that's kind of interesting out of those who were aware. So if we go back to that multi-stage decision-making process, This is my two Floridians. I have one in green and one in red. Essentially, only only half of those that are subject to irrigation restrictions seem to know about them. Um, Many of them believe they're optional. So really only 1 out of 2 of the folks that need to follow these policies are moving on to that second stage. So to me right there, that explains a lot of the lack of compliance. So next we looked at how people who know about irrigation restrictions in Florida, how they feel about these policies. And the theory shows us that we can kind of quantify perceptions using 5 characteristics. And those can be described as relative advantage. Is engaging in this behavior going to improve on what I'm currently doing? So is it better to follow irrigation restrictions than to not? Second would be, is this practice compatible with my values, my beliefs, with the way that I take care of my yard, with even my irrigation technology? Um, the third is, how simple is it to comply with these irrigation restrictions, or how complicated is it? The fourth is, can I see the results of other people engaging in this behavior? So, can someone look around their neighborhood and see people having good results, um, or not? And then lastly, is this something I can try out before I commit permanently? So, can I follow irrigation restrictions for a couple of weeks and then decide not to do it? Essentially, if all of these 5 things are positive, you're going to have a really positive perception of the behavior and be likely to engage in it. So we asked the folks all over the state how they felt about following irrigation restrictions, and quantified them using these characteristics. And I'm not going to go into the numbers here, but these 5 characteristics could be as low as -2 if people felt really poorly about the behavior, or as high as +2. Most of them hovered kind of just under a 1, so positive but not extremely positive. And we do see that simplicity is kind of the lowest. So people think that maybe these policies are a little difficult to follow. Now we plugged these perceptions into a model that can help us to predict people's behavior. And only 2 of those perceptions really served as significant predictors, and they were compatibility and simplicity. So what that means is that the people who are going to comply with these policies are those people who think that it's simple to follow them in terms of both understanding the policies and being able to do the technical side of that compliance. And they're also the people who believe that following irrigation restrictions is something that's compatible with their beliefs and their values and the way they take care of their yard. And I don't have this information in here, but something that we have discovered is that there is a lot of sort of mixed feelings about whether following irrigation restrictions will help or hurt the health of your yard. So we have a lot of people that think that following these policies will hurt them, hurt the health of the yard. And I think that comes out in that compatibility piece. So this is starting to help us kind of paint a picture of the people who do know about their irrigation restrictions and why they might or might not comply with them. So being in extension, I'm always looking for ways to better communicate with folks around the state, and working with some of the conservation professionals that I engage with. We found that a lot of the communication around these irrigation restrictions are like these really, really lengthy websites that are just a lot of text, a lot of information, and they could be kind of confusing. So we wanted to identify some strategies, and there had been no message testing done to our awareness of kind of the best way to inform people of irrigation restrictions. So this is a super simple kind of graphic design. This is 3 separate messages, and they look nearly identical. And they were developed to look like social media kind of tiles. And all of them are sort of challenging the recipient to only water when permitted. And each of them are saying in most places in Florida, there are restrictions. But what we varied here is how much information we told them about these restrictions. So the first one just says restrictions on the days of the week. And then the second one added in and times of the day. And then the third one added in may vary by season. So you might not expect to see much difference. But what we did is in one of the annual water panels is we randomized this. So each recipient got one of these and only one. And after that, we asked a series of questions about their willingness to learn more about irrigation restrictions in a number of different ways, as well as their willingness to engage in behaviors to come into compliance. Things like adjusting their own irrigation timer, to having an extension professional actually visit their home for kind of like a free tune-up to make sure they were in compliance. So by randomizing these messages, we were able to compare whether any of them were more effective. So we had a control group that didn't receive a message, but still had the same questions about their willingness to seek information as well as their willingness to take action. And then we had the three different messages that we tested. And kind of interesting, that third one that had the most information on it was actually the most effective. And the others were essentially the same in what people were willing to do after seeing them. So that message with a little bit more information actually looked to be more effective. Now, I won't go into all this. I know it's a lot on this slide, but we showed these graphics to people who indicated they knew about the irrigation restrictions that applied to them, as well as those who did not. And kind of interestingly, what we found is that the people who were already aware of these policies responded much more to seeing a graphic. So essentially, if someone already knew about the policies, seeing this image, which was essentially almost a reminder, increased their willingness to seek information about irrigation restrictions. So kind of key takeaways from this message testing piece is that irrigation restriction messages that had a little bit more detail were generally more effective overall. We're talking on kind of a statewide level. And then while there was a lot of variability in that slide I just showed you, the messages really didn't have an effect, and in a few cases had a negative effect on people who didn't already know about their irrigation restrictions. So that wasn't what I wanted to learn, and it sort of created more questions, as research often does, but kind of leaves us with, like, how do we reach people who don't know about these important policies? And we're still having those discussions. We did test some different graphics in our last statewide panel, and didn't really see much different. It was kind of a similar trend where the people who already knew about them, the irrigation restrictions, were very responsive, and those who didn't were not. So again, kind of kind of coming back to like what we've learned so far about this behavior is that half of the people who are subject to these restrictions can't develop a positive perception because they don't know about them. So they can't decide to comply. And although overall people are fairly positive about them, there are barriers in it's complicated to understand these restrictions, and there seems to be an ability to see how following irrigation restrictions can be compatible with your needs, with your values. And so we think it's important to deliver detailed information to the people who are aware of restrictions. Um, but we do really need to target the people who are aware and the people who are unaware separately. And I think there's a lot of opportunities to learn how to do that better. We need to better understand how to raise awareness and motivate the people who don't know about these policies. So we have lots more work to do. But I think you could see where education really comes in here in addressing this behavior. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit. I think I mentioned that I have kind of a pet peeve about sprinklers running when it is raining. And that's kind of brings in the second behavior I wanted to talk about, which is reducing irrigation when we've had enough rainfall. And like in Florida in the summer, generally, if you are a person that irrigates, you do not need to run your sprinklers. But if you see this picture here, this is something you will see all the time in residences as well as medians all over the place where it's raining and sprinklers are running. So this was another behavior I've had the opportunity to work on. And this behavior is kind of neat because we collected statewide perception data through our annual panel, but also had the opportunity to try an experiment in a neighborhood to try and change behaviors. And so I'll tell you a little bit about both of those. So residents in Florida tend to water their lawn with, at a minimum, the amount that the lawn needs without thinking about how much rain we've received. And so switching this mindset to where irrigation is a supplement is really what we're working towards. So big opportunity here. The model that we used here tells us that when people have positive attitudes about reducing their irrigated landscape, when they believe they can do it, they know how to do it, and when they believe that people around them will approve, they're most likely to engage in this behavior. So what we found is that the most important predictor of people's willingness to engage in this behavior related to social norms. So whether engaging in this behavior would result in people approving of that behavior. So very different from the previous behavior. And I won't get into all these numbers, but we did some follow-up research to find out where the perceived social approval came from. And what seemed most important was whether people believed those around them engaged in the practice as well, which is called descriptive norms. And then the groups of people that were most important were friends and family. So if you think your friends and family engage in this conservation behavior, you're much more likely to do it yourself. That's basic peer pressure. So the strongest predictor of intent to reduce irrigated landscape is whether someone thinks others are engaged in the practice. So that's pretty important because we don't think about the social norms side of things very often. Now, I mentioned we had a chance to kind of test this in a neighborhood, and this is a very fun project. So we did this we did this 2-year project in partnership with the Southwest Florida Water Management District in a large planned community. You can see it's very lush from the picture. And we had this experimental sign that we installed, and you should be able to see that the thing across the top is a solar panel. So it was a solar panel powered sign. And right at the entrance of this gated community, so if you lived there, you had to see it. And let's see. What we did is we updated the sign for 52 weeks with the 7-day rainfall total. And we did this on Wednesdays. So every Wednesday, we updated it from a distance with the rainfall total from the previous 7 days. We prompted people on the sign to turn off your irrigation when rainfall is adequate. And we also, this changed depending on the season, but we educated people on how much water lawns need per week. And this is based on best practices out of research from the University of Florida. Now, something that kind of drove us a little bit crazy about this project is that there was specifically no educational component during the intervention. The piece that I led, we had a pre and post intervention survey. So before the sign was installed, we got to get a lot of information from the residents that lived there. And then after that sign had been there and updated for 52 weeks, we collected the same information. And a really neat thing about this project is we partnered with the H2O Save program from my center, which provided us the ability to analyze water use within this experimental neighborhood, as well as in a comparison neighborhood that was very close by. And we selected it based on similar ages of the homes, size of the homes, and we used owner-occupied homes, like we're in the experimental neighborhood. So this was kind of a golden opportunity, because a lot of times when we do social research, we don't have the opportunity to collect water use data. So we drew our rainfall data from the PRISM system, which models rainfall using multiple local points. We had one communication. So before the sign was installed, we sent a postcard to inform the community. And as someone who's been in education for a really long time, I didn't love the fact that we weren't educating the residents, working with the community, but that was kind of part of this project, was to really see what the sign itself did. So we sent the postcard, and then we installed the sign, and then it was kind of hands off. And had a lot of information. I only put a little bit in here, but so we asked people at the post survey how their awareness of their lawn's water needs had changed. And it is, let me see, I think this is like nearly 40% in total. It did indicate there was either a moderate, substantial, or extreme increase in awareness. So we thought that was kind of positive. And then also on the post survey, we had, I think this is about 50% of the residents in this community in total, said that they either sometimes, most of the time, or always use this rainfall value to make decisions about their irrigation practices. And we asked about accuracy as well. And there were definitely some mixed perceptions here. We did have some issues with, we found that on really, really cloudy days that the sign might cut out because of it being run by a solar panel. And we also had so many dry weeks over the course of this project that it was literally zero. And there was a period where zero was on the sign for quite some time. And so there were a lot of accuracy concerns, I think, and it didn't help that we weren't educating. So we do see the largest group of folks, 35%, thought the sign was moderately accurate, but not many people thought it was very or extremely accurate. So when we asked people to self-report their engagement in various conservation practices, there was essentially no detectable differences. So something like monitoring the amount of local rainfall, so I can adjust my irrigation at the point before this project started, that we saw no increase from the beginning to the end. And things like reducing the amount of water I apply to my lawn and landscape based on weekly rainfall, same thing. It's actually slightly less, but not statistically different. So really, we can't say that there was any detectable behavior change among people in the community. So we have kind of a mix of somewhat positive and not so positive findings here in this pilot test. Now, you can see on the left is the monthly rainfall before we installed the sign. And you can see on the right side here, that's the monthly rainfall after we installed the sign. Similar pattern, but you can see that the intervention year was drier than before we put the sign in the neighborhood. Okay, and then this is the average monthly water use. And you can see that the treatment is the orange line, and the blue is the comparison neighborhood that did not have a sign in it. At the end of the day, there were no statistical differences. So we didn't have any detectable water savings, which isn't surprising because we also didn't have any detectable behavior changes reported by the residents. So we had the opportunity to get a lot of feedback from the residents. And if you could see this picture, some people were really upset about the fact that the sign was there. They didn't know about it. They perceived it as being inaccurate. Someone took the time to put their own sign on the sign that says it lies, because they felt that strongly that it was inaccurate. We got a lot of really, really interesting qualitative feedback from the community, a lot of really positive things. Someone said, I love this project since I really believe in using rainfall to determine how I water. But then there were other people who said there's a trust issue. It's off a lot. It only changes once a week. There could be more communications on how to use it. A lot of mixed findings here. So at the end of the day, if we're looking at this project as something to hopefully prompt water conservation, it wasn't successful, but we had the opportunity to really make some recommendations on how to do better. So, like I said, really no change in water usage. One of the things that we were kind of concerned about is that keeping this sign up for the full 52 weeks and having it announcing there has been no rain in the past week, it was a way to highlight the lack of precipitation, which could have actually promoted more irrigation than would have happened without the sign. So there was no real indication of behavior change, but residents did report their awareness of their lawn's water needs, and they more frequently thought about the amount of rainfall. So that would be a little bit of a win. And those positive perceptions among the residents, especially across a drier year, maybe point to the community being ready to engage a little more. But for something like this project to be successful, we made a number of recommendations. Number one, to build trust by involving the residents in the process and addressing the technical issues that sort of harmed that trust. We thought that it was really important to actively engage the community to build the residents' sense of ownership and inclusion. I will mention that we heard from some of the residents that they were still getting fined by their community if their lawn wasn't perfectly green, which that's kind of a mixed message that the residents were receiving. We suggested maybe using the signage only during the rainy season when there is that real opportunity to reduce water use, and possibly share the information in different ways, such as social media or text messages. And a big one that we thought was really important is to have rolling updates instead of just once a week, to really have like a consistent number that tells you what the previous 7 days precipitation really was. So then if we go back to the survey-based findings that have the kind of psychological theory, um, those findings call for more than just a sign, and they really call for building more of a sense of conservation as a social norm. And so to do that, it's important to create opportunities for people to connect to water resources when it's just automatically coming out of your sprinklers into your yard. There's kind of a disconnect. But also, I think it's really important to make invisible norms more visible. And this is something my entire career that has just really fascinated me. But the people who don't run their irrigation every day, you don't notice that. The people who do, it's very obvious. There's overspray on the road and the sidewalks, and so it's that negative norm that is really more visible. And so finding ways to increase the visibility of the people who are engaged in conservation is, I think, a real challenge and opportunity for all of us who work in water conservation. So I'm really excited to share this information because those recommendations that we made were absolutely implemented. And so they just completed a phase 2 pilot. And what we suggested was really taken to heart. So this was also located in Southwest Florida, different experimental community. And the sign was installed in June of 2024, so they just completed a full year of the experiment. And instead of that static 7-day total, they used a 7-day rolling total. So if it's Thursday, you see everything since the previous Thursday. If it's Friday, you see everything since the previous Friday. It was a solar panel powered sign, but they had a battery backup. So they addressed those tech issues. And they implemented the community involvement. So the sign is pretty similar what they installed, but there were direct mail pieces that were distributed quarterly. There was a lot of education in the newsletter, and there was like a community water expo that they also did. So I was able to get the first piece of water use analysis. They didn't have the funds for kind of the social survey, so we don't have self-reported data. But looking at the water use between the experimental neighborhood and the control neighborhood is really promising. So they have the data from August through December of last year. And what it comes out to, and it's kind of like extrapolated to what it would be per year. So these are kind of estimates, but there is a detectable savings. And what it looks like is about 33,000 gallons per day saved in the community, which would be about 12 million gallons saved per year. Um, it includes an average water savings of 37 gallons per home per day. So it's kind of interesting. And then looking at the costs of the education and the sign itself, essentially with a brand new sign, it's costing about $1.32 for every 1,000 gallons of water saved. So it's kind of like if you just look at the pilot we did, it was not super promising, but the fact that we have lessons learned that we could use to inform something that really seems to have driven conservation. It's pretty exciting, I think. Um, anyway, so it's been fun to kind of share two of these different areas of research, but just sort of some ideas for how to apply these concepts to your water programs. I think regardless of where you work and your specific capacity, we have a role to play in teaching how to make changes. So looking at the irrigation restrictions, clearly there's an issue with people thinking it's too complicated to follow these restrictions. So education absolutely has a role there, but we need to go beyond providing information. And so um, there's really it's important to know your audience, and like we talked about with the irrigation restrictions, to determine where your audience is relative to the change. So we found there's 50% of the folks don't know about the need to comply. So that's one piece that needs to be addressed. But then also what do they think? There's people who do know about irrigation restrictions or whatever conservation topic you're working on. Do they think it's a good thing, or what are their concerns? And I hope by sharing these two different behaviors with you, you can see that influences really vary from context to context. And something that I learn over and over with every research project is usually what I think people are going to think about the conservation technology or practice. I'm usually wrong. So it's really important to find out what people think. And that social norms piece is really, really important. People need to be engaged. They need to know that there are people around them that would approve of them engaging and that also do the same thing. And there's a lot of opportunity there. So just kind of some thoughts. I think there's so much we can do in addressing the human side of water conservation. And really appreciate the opportunity to be here today. The research I shared, it was not just me, a ton of collaborators, mostly here at the University of Florida, that I do want to be sure to acknowledge that are on this slide. And I thank you so much for your time and for having me.
Thanks so much, Laura. I think these are all great. I mean, the sign is and plays such important role in people perception and behavior. I think it's going to be very valuable, and I learned a lot. I mean, I'm thinking of having something like that maybe in the area where we work on. With that, Ben, if you would like to move on to the questions, that would be great.
Yeah, so we just have three of them. If anyone has more questions, if you want to stick them in the Q&A. So we got a couple more coming in. First one for you is from Sophie. She asked, is most of Florida's household outdoor water use during the dry season, or is it spread out year round?
It's spread out year round. I could not tell you the specific numbers for like dry versus wet season. The numbers I shared were kind of annual, averages. But yeah, I mean, it really varies, but generally it does go down when there's more precipitation.
Okay. All right, the next question is, how are irrigation restrictions enforced? I know that the water cops, I guess a reference, we have those here a little bit, that drive around looking for improper watering in other states, but I wonder the strategy if there's a technology that supports the monitoring
Mm.
Laura, before you answer that, could you just stop the sharing so people can see you and
Oh, yes. Thank you.
Oh,
thanks.
there we are.
Yeah. And oh, and you grew up in Florida too. That's great. Um, yeah, so this is an area that is very inconsistent throughout the state, and one of the documented barriers to compliance is certainly that there are inadequate resources for enforcement. But like in Gainesville, the city where I live, there is actually, I know at least one person who that is their full-time job is they drive around where people are not supposed to be watering and can see if people are actively watering or have just stopped. And they do try and do a lot of warnings before it gets to fines, but some places have absolutely no resources to enforce. So, I mean, obviously that's a piece of the awareness issue. So it really varies, but there's if you search like the news for fines related to irrigation restrictions, it is kind of a hot topic, but overall it's under enforced.
Yeah, thank you. I know that's one of the things that they've looked at a bit in Utah to trying to figure out how to enforce that. So that's a good question. The next one, you were talking about the postcards and surveys. They were wondering how many were sent out and how many responded.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I don't have the exact number, but it was something like 650 homes in the neighborhood. And we got close to we had the resources, fortunately, to do both mail and electronic surveys. So we did multiple mailings to each of the homes and tried to drive people to the electronic version. But we got, I want to say it was like 350 or 400, something really close to that. And it was nearly the exact number pre and post test. So we got a really good response rate, which is maybe a little bit surprising because I think people in general didn't feel like super connected to that project.
Okay, thank you. The next one's kind of a comment, maybe for Shatal and I to think about for a future webinar that we'll have down the road. This is from Letitia. She's in northern Utah, but was a Kansas master gardener. They have some concerns here about conserving water, but she also knows that turf is a heat sink.
Mhm.
And we are concerned about landscaping to prevent fires. Sometimes managing all of these issues seems to be pretty complex. I wish we had more guidance. That is a great point, as we're talking about different landscaping options. So that's something we might tackle on a future one, specifically with turf. We just had one last month. We talked about turf a little bit, but that'll be a fun one to go over a little bit more.
That's right.
Okay. Okay, the next one, in Florida, do you see homeowners push back against water restrictions because they see bad practices at commercial or municipal properties? I've seen a lot of that here in Utah with people not wanting to change their ways until big water users do better.
Yeah, that's definitely, yeah, that's a great question, comment. I think not in the projects I shared, but we've asked in the past about, people's perceptions about who's wasting water, who they trust in terms of their conservation. And there's definitely some issues there. And even with like residential in our very urban state, residential versus agriculture, even. So yeah, and like the picture of the sprinklers in the rain from my presentation, that was not a residence. That was a commercial property, and we see it all the time. And I mentioned the medians, where you'll drive around, and those are managed by public entities, and you'll see that. So yeah, I think there's an opportunity to do better for sure.
Last question, unless there's any more. This is from Dan. He asked that I'm interested to learn if across your research projects, are you able to isolate irrigation practices or irrigation behaviors for lawn irrigation versus irrigation for landscape plants, trees, shrubs, ground cover, ornamentals, and gardens?
That is a great question. So I can't speak to the water use side of things, but we have asked in the past very specific things like talking about capping your irrigation for established landscape beds, that sort of things. But it really kind of depends on the behavior of interest. But we nice when we talk about the behaviors.
I mean, I put in a fact sheet on irrigation, but not related to behavior. It's just basic. Maybe that's also helpful. There is one question in the chat. Does anyone have example of messaging that worked well to make conservation a social norm? Anyone wants to take on this? Laura, you have anything in there? Like we read
Well,
two of the practices, but
yeah, so there's been a lot more research in the like energy sphere, but one of the concepts that's really worked has been communicating to people about the energy usage of their neighbors, but that only works when they're like using more than their neighbors. So you have to be really careful, because if you communicate to somebody and they will actually share like the number, like the kilowatt hours you used in comparison to your neighbors. But for those who are kind of like low energy users, it's shown that if you tell them that, they can actually increase because they think they're, they're below the norm and they can come up. So if you communicate to in this context to the high water users, that would be one thing. And there's been a lot of work around like group identity. So, things like we're members of this community and we are committed to doing X, Y, or Z to conserve water resources. So there is some, but there's so much opportunity to improve that area of research.
I agree. And we at through Sewell, like we do a lot of education outreach and teaching. I think from the surveys that we conduct and water district conduct, we found out that not all people know about how much water they use. And telling them that there are like we are using more water, but there is opportunity to change things or use less water without changing the dynamics a lot. Like you can save with whatever you have in your landscape. So education followed by a practical solution, I think, has seemed to be very effective here in some cases. But I know there are so many. I mean, if we talk to water districts, if we talk to cities, municipalities, there have been so much. Okay, I think that's all we have then, right? There's yes, one open question. We have an alert system that we can send out to text message about water times and a digital billboard too. Wow, so that's one of the way.
Yeah, one thing I would add too, if you're so for Utah and in the Salt Lake area, they do have a program called Water Maps, that Chantal might be familiar with, but it's one where you can log in and you can see, it gives you your specific water usage and it gives you kind of a rating if you're high, low, or average. It doesn't tell you what your neighbor's doing. They were very specific to avoid that because they didn't want that comparison. But it tells you it's like this is where you're at compared to your type of yard, the size. But they're trying to replicate that program in different parts of the state. But I know in the Salt Lake area that one's live, and can be used by the folks up in Salt Lake. So it's kind of a neat one. But getting the word out, not to answer your question necessarily, but it's a resource that we need to do a better job at pushing it out and advertising. And that's some of the things that cities have done through that, their messaging systems. They've sent that out to some of those areas, but kind of neat.
Yeah, thanks so much, Laura. I think that's all we had. And thank you, everyone. Thanks, Ben. We will see you in the next webinar. Thanks.
Thank you so much.